Hello, everyone. Welcome in. We'll just take about a minute here to let people get in, and then we'll get started. Glad to see everyone. All right, I'll go ahead and start kicking things off here. Welcome to the Native Ag Media Education Series. This series is an effort of the communications teams from Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, Intertribal Agriculture Council, and Native American Agriculture Fund to share best practices and effective communication techniques for media professionals and news outlets looking to highlight stories about agriculture in Indian country. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along. At the end of the presentation, we'll answer your questions as time allows. Now, we would like to give a brief recap of the first part of this series covering Indian Agriculture 101.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam. Back in September, we hosted part 1 of our Native Ag Media Education series. We discussed tribal food sovereignties past, present, and future. We gave a brief overview on Native American history in general, and then covered some focus areas that our organizations are keying in on moving forward. Our last webinar, along with this webinar, will be available on the Native American YouTube page and hosted on NAF's website under resources. And we will also be sending out an email that encompasses many links and resources that we have covered in this series. So once again, thank you all for being here today. Let's get started.
All right, so I'd like to give our panel of speakers a chance to introduce themselves, starting with Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative.
Bojo, Mary Belzuk, Nadesh Nakas, Bodawatami, and Dow. Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Belzuk, and I am a citizen of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And I am the Communications Director at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us. I used to be a reporter for my tribe, so I know how important time is to you guys and how quick things can go. So thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with us and learn a little bit more about working in Indian country and building relationships. So Chimigwech.
Hi, I'm Tish Mindeman. I'm the communications manager at IFAI. And I'm also excited for everyone to be here and learn a little bit more about Indian country and how we can present the narrative properly. Next is IAC.
Hi, everyone. My name is Barbara Soule. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the Intertribal Agriculture Council. I am Dene, a citizen of the Navajo Nation, and I'm looking forward to this webinar, continuing this series to learn about how we message about our tribes and tribal producers.
Hello again. My name is Pua Trice. I am Samoan, and I am the Marketing Director here at IAC. Now, Native American Agriculture Fund will introduce themselves.
Thank you, Pua. My name is Whitney Sani. I'm the Director of Communications and Policy at the Native American Agriculture Fund. We thank you for your time and being here. I also want to say a thank you to our speakers. You're going to hear from them later in this presentation, but we're all working collaboratively to tell the story of tribal agriculture. So we really appreciate your time today.
Hello again. My name is Samantha Below. I am from the Spokane tribe, and I am a communications manager for the Native American Agriculture Fund.
Sio Walel Dawado. Hello, everybody. My name is Gabrielle Butter. I'm the Associate Communications Officer for NAF. Welcome. And I'll pass it back to Pua.
So today, our topic will be telling the story of tribal agriculture, building relationships in Indian country, and best practices. This is a deeper dive into the technical practices when working with Native producers in the field. Throughout this discussion, you'll notice our focus on representation and progress. Our hope is that as you craft Native stories, they will be inspired by fresh insights and a greater appreciation for the diverse world of Native agriculture.
So now we're just going to get into it and dive into it. So the use of data in Indian country. Data is very key to writing your stories, as well as just finding out what's going on in Indian country. So we can go on to the next slide. In Indian country, like I said, data is very, very important. It helps with crafting policy and adequately addressing the needs across the nation, but it is very, very important in Indian country. However, that is not always available, and sometimes the data that is available doesn't fully show the full picture of what's going on. So I just like to remind folks that it's really important to remember that, yes, these data points are numbers, but they also represent people. They represent moms, they represent dads, they represent kiddos, they represent elders. There's people behind these numbers. So when you're going out and digging into stories or trying to find the data, keep that in mind, but also keep in mind what group is behind producing some of that data and how did they get some of those numbers. I met someone earlier this week that said I was very blunt when I flat out asked, who's funding you and how are you going about this research? Because it's very important to dig into those things. It's not always been used in the best way in our communities. So you might see some hesitancy when you jump in and try and start building those relationships and try and do some of that research. So just be a little bit patient coming in and know that things haven't always been the best, but we do know that that data is very important and being able to tell the story and, like I said, go and actually tackle these issues. And you'll learn a little bit more about some of the ways that our organizations and how NAF and FRAC are doing some of that work today, trying to find some of those data holes. But just wanted to remind folks that there are people behind those numbers. We can go on to the next slide. So we kind of put a few different bullet points on these past two slides, and I hate to read slides off. Y'all can read, so I'll let you all read the different data and statistics that we put in there. But I also just wanted to highlight that sometimes it can be a little problematic. I don't know if y'all remember a news channel just putting this out there as others, but that happens really frequently. And so again, remember, we're folks behind this, we're people behind these numbers. They have true consequences, and just lumping us in together as other it's not the best practice to do. So when you can, definitely look for specific data on Indian country, but also, again, look where that data came from, ask those questions, and building those relationships that we'll keep going back to throughout this presentation and throughout the last one. It's really key and can help guiding a lot of this as you start going and covering more stories in Indian country.
All right, so currently our organizations have a few initiatives that we'd like to share on gathering data in Indian country. For instance, the Building Resiliency Stakeholder Survey will frame the current crop insurance landscape faced by farmers and ranchers in underserved communities. We're still gathering data for this survey, and you can respond at the link shown here. Native American Agriculture Fund's Food Access Survey aims to understand food access, food sovereignty, and food security for Native American people. Responses are still being gathered as well, so if you'd like, please respond. And Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative shares policy briefings every week. You can read past briefings here.
Okay. And historically, there has been a focus on poverty and disparities in media representation, and as Mary Bill mentioned, in data, even as going as far as including Native people as something else or categories within those data. So I challenge you when you're writing your stories to question who's missing representation in that data. by cultivating those native-led stories, the narrative actually shifts to highlight successes. It challenges stereotypes and provides accurate depictions. It challenges the perceptions of poverty and highlights economic resilience. It emphasizes Native Americans and their role as stewards of the land, and how traditional ecological knowledge and agricultural practices can lead conversations and conservation efforts and climate change mitigation. It can also raise awareness about the diversity of our tribal communities and reaffirms tribal sovereignty, ultimately supporting initiatives and policy priorities that promote the economic development and sustainable agricultural practices and successes for generations to come.
So how can the data help us as communicators? The Reclaiming Native Truth research project published in 2018 found that 78% of Americans have limited knowledge or are completely unaware of American Indians altogether. This research revealed 4 key themes that can help us support a new narrative through shared values, historical context, visibility, and contemporary life, and a call to action. Native values of family, connection to the land, and respect for culture and tradition are understood and respected by non-Native Americans. Being able to link these values with a wider audience creates connections on a more personal level. And research shows that most non-Native people who don't fully understand the true histories of tribal nations are open to learning. Weaving in facts about tribal histories makes people more receptive and willing to act on issues important to Indian country. And writing about the vital contributions of tribes and Native producers from a modern lens helps people move past stereotypes ingrained in media tropes and popular culture. This is why we do our research and build data to illustrate the contemporary challenges Native farmers and ranchers face nationwide today. An example of this, of course, is what Pooh just mentioned in IAC's Building Resiliency Survey. And we can't change this narrative alone, but when we all work to develop a new frame, a new narrative that moves away from a deficit framework grounded in values, history, and visibility, we can build more support for Native issues. And, I encourage everyone to create a call to action, invite your audiences to make some change. Next slide. So we've established why this is important. Let's take a deeper dive into the how and how you do this, how you build trust. What are the common expectations for engaging Native communities? Following this series, we hope you take away a sense of confidence, understanding, and foundational knowledge on how to engage with tribal producers. Building relationships in Indian country and tribal communities is the key to changing the narrative of Native peoples. Research the tribes and regions you're working with ahead of time. Accurate reporting requires a deep understanding of historical experiences and perspectives of tribal communities. Without this knowledge, stereotypes are perpetuated. Also, each geographical area experiences agriculture differently. We all have different agricultural practices that encompass valuable traditional ecological knowledge. Acknowledging and respecting our traditional knowledge and Indigenous science validates Indigenous contributions to the field of agriculture. The media also frequently overlooks or provides inadequate coverage of issues affecting Indian country, further emphasizing why it's important to have accurate and comprehensive data to overcome these narratives that marginalize and perpetuate stereotypes. And lastly, identify trusted partners and organizations such as IAC, IFAI, and NAF to find the research, build historical context, and make connections to tribes and tribal producers. Conducting thorough research, building rapport with trusted partners, and allowing Native people to tell their own stories repairs a history of misrepresentation.
Now we get to dive into the fun do's and don'ts, best practices and not so great practices. And I always kind of like to look back at my time whenever I was doing a lot of writing for my tribe and doing a lot of freelance writing, and how mindful I was about the tense of verb I was using. Because I realized as I was putting out content, as I was even doing stuff for our Cultural Heritage Center, that tense really mattered in crafting an image of Indian country and an image of my tribe, and it put us in the past. A simple tense was putting us in the past and making folks think that maybe we didn't exist anymore. And I think it just shows how powerful words are. They truly are so powerful. So think about that as you're writing. we are vibrant, we are living. There's amazing things happening across Indian country. And by putting in a past tense, it really does put everything in the past. And there's some other really easy ways to also be a little bit more respectful. Don't overgeneralize. There are 574 plus federally recognized tribes, and we are all very different. Even other Potawatomi tribes are different than my Potawatomi tribe. Don't make assumptions. I don't know if y'all had an English teacher like I did, but assuming it can make an ass out of you and me. So please do not do that as you go out there. Again, building that relationship, building that rapport, getting to know the people that you're working with and covering and writing about. I think it'll be key. And some of these things naturally will happen when you do things the right way and you set that foundation in a good way. It really does help form your articles and your coverage in a good way as well. So again, think about words. They have a lot of of weight and worth, especially coming from Indigenous communities. Next slide.
Sharing the Native perspective as we foster a narrative shift of empowerment. This work will counter the absence of representation leading to invisibility and other dominant narratives. We want to ensure that these stories are led by a Native voice. That way they reflect the true Native perspective instead of those that perpetuate stereotypes and marginalization.
So we've talked about cultivating relationships, the common do's and don'ts, and sharing from a Native lens. But now we want to go over the best ways to connect to help foster that newfound relationship. So first off, media outlets will come into our communities with their own fast turnaround timelines. It's crucial to ask first if nonprofit organizations have the capacity to meet that deadline. In terms of reaching out through NAF to our producers, we have multiple levels of communication before it reaches the grantee. First, it'll go from our comms department, where we'll match your story up with our grantees and generate a list. Then it goes to our compliance team, who narrow it down, and then our point of contact, who then eventually actually speaks to the grantee to get that story going. So, and it's also important to note that each of our organizations reach out to Native producers differently, and the way we reach out may differ for each story. So that's why it's crucial to discuss the timeline in that very first email. And then second, tribal nations heavily reside in rural areas. And due to that, there may be limited options throughout rural America when trying to connect with any farmer, rancher, or producer, but especially for tribal producers. According to the Federal Communication Commission, 22.3% of Americans in rural areas and 27.7% in tribal lands lack high-speed broadband internet access, whereas in urban areas, only about 1.5% of Americans have that issue. And while the pandemic has helped start building that infrastructure, it's still lackluster in many rural areas across the US. So we don't recommend calling people through Zoom calls or Teams unless you know that person has good internet access. And we do recommend cell phones or calling their landlines, or if at all possible, meeting with them in person. And we know if in person isn't possible, then if you are calling them and you're having communication issues, like the lines are dodgy or they're static, check for weather, whether it's rain or high winds in that area. If they're using landlines, there will be that disconnect there. And also check their production before you call. Oftentimes, it's much better to call after their work hours. So knowing their production first is crucial. Next, I'll send it over to Sam for our next recommendation.
Thanks, Gabby. Another way to build a connection when making those site visits with a farmer, rancher, or producer is keeping them informed by sending over a shot list. So as media professionals, you might already be using this best practice with your photographer or videographer, or if you are this person for your organization. So this step comes after you have identified the interviewee, you scheduled time for an interview or site visit. And one thing we recommend is this shot list prior to your site visit, and then sharing that shot list with your interviewee ahead of time for their review and approval. One question to have at the forefront of your conversation when you get in front of them is there anything that you do not want me to capture on camera? And we ask that because we want to be considerate of that cultural boundary. Some people might not have an issue at all, and that's great, but asking that question ahead of time already takes that step to building trust and lets the interviewee know that you are aware and not all things need to be shared. So asking that question at the forefront of the interview is essential. However, even prior to that, some steps you can take when going into an interview or site visit, if you aren't doing this already. So one would be creating that shot list. This can be an Excel sheet or Word document, but include columns for shot numbers, shot descriptions, shot types, wide shot, close shot, camera angles, key people that you want to get photos of, props, or any additional notes. Sometimes you only get one shot at this with the one farmer or producer or being out at this site specifically. So being prepared ahead of time is key. The next would be to share the shot list with your team and interviewee so you're able to capitalize on your time in front of them. Time is money. These might be farmers, ranchers, and producers, and they got to get going. So sharing the shot list ahead of them, with them ahead of time, will make for a more efficient site visit while letting the interviewee know what you're trying to capture. So like Maribel said, being upfront and transparent, and don't be afraid to ask any questions. If you are new to writing about native agriculture in general, and you are taking photos of plants, crops, cattle, equipment, make sure you're writing the correct names of those things down so you know what to refer to them as post-site visit. Then following the interview, you can ask the interviewee, what is the best way I can share these photos with you for you to review? Think about naming your photos ahead of time so they can see what you see. And don't forget to keep notes when you are taking those photos. So when you're going out there taking photos of some traditional foods, say like capturing images of wild rice, and then the native farmer or producer happens to just randomly share a story of the traditional connection Indigenous peoples have in the area with wild rice, you don't want to miss that story. So make sure that you are always thinking of keeping those notes and then getting approval to use the images that you took. This is a good general best practice, but a good reminder, just because you have the photo or they agree to it ahead of time doesn't mean they want it necessarily shared. Obviously, backing up everything, malfunctions happen. Sometimes you only get one shot, make it count. And then finally, sharing the end product with them for review and approval. It can be as simple as, this is what we put together coming out of our site visit or interview with you. Does this look good to you? This builds upon that trust, and perhaps the interviewee leaves feeling heard, respected, and which potentially opens up the door to follow-up interviews or the next step in making those connections in Indian country. Indian country is mighty, but it is small. Everyone knows everyone, and Indian agriculture is even smaller. So you want to make sure you make a good, lasting impression every time you meet with Native American farmer, rancher, producer, or someone in the industry.
I think this might be my favorite slide on this session, just because it does include so much great information, and Sam made a lot of great points. I also want to highlight just being mindful too of any recording, which I know y'all probably are, but there are stories and things like in my tribe that should not be recorded. So even thinking about that, you might be hearing a story, a traditional story that should not be written down and it shouldn't be recorded. So just think about those things. Again, building those relationships, it'll come through that. But another thing that we want to just kind of highlight at the end of the slide is the fact that, and I've talked about it a little bit, our words do have a lot of weight in Indian country. It's more than just us when we speak. When I'm sitting here speaking to y'all, I'm representing my tribe. I'm representing my family. I'm representing the greater Native American community. I'm also representing the last 7 generations and the next 7 generations to come after me. And that's a lot. And a lot of us Native folk, whenever we're going out and doing anything, we have this on our mind. So just be mindful of that we are thinking a lot more than just in the now or who we are whenever we're talking. So building that rapport, though, will make it a little bit easier for us to have some of those conversations with you as reporters. But just remember that it is a lot more than us when we speak.
IAC has actively supported tribal producers across 14 regions nationwide with on-the-ground technical assistance and services. To further the discussion on connecting with producers, I'd like to introduce Tikaan Galbreath, the Technical Assistance Network Director here at IAC. His commitment to the intersection of individual and community wellness through food continues to build resilience for Native producers.
Thank you, Pua. Appreciate the introduction. Like that photo. It's growing out my long hair. Got short hair now. So grateful to be here and part of this conversation and contributing to it. I'm in an interesting intersection as the director of the Technical Assistant Network for IAC, but I also got my master's degree in nonfiction writing from the Institute of American Indian Arts. And so this intersection of telling story within agriculture is very close and dear to my heart. What comes to my mind closely is that, it's very, a commonality is that respect for each other and the reciprocity that is reflected in our relationships, not only to the land, but to each other and to your colleagues. And so thinking about writing a story on agriculture in Indian country or connecting with a producer, the question is, well, what are you giving back to the community? How will that story benefit the producer? What is the contribution? Are you making financial gain from this story? Are you offering financial compensation to those that you're interviewing? Are you providing the photos, free of charge, back to the community so that they can use it in any way that they want, without the copyright of your own, collection? So just thinking about how you are contributing back to the work and supporting the producer, and not just extracting the story. Our stories are sacred. They're a gift when they're given, and they are foundational to they are. Some are sacred and are not to be shared, right? And some are more public and furthering this narrative that we're reclaiming. I'm a strong believer that we are the stories we tell ourselves, and so when we think about the national narratives, reclaiming it by focusing on the positive, which was highlighted earlier, is so crucial, right? If we're always focused on that, lack of resources or the lack of availability of whatever, the poverty focus, then that is the stories that we tell ourselves, and not only how the nation receives it, but how we start to perpetuate that image into ourselves. So we need to be telling our stories in the positive light, sharing the successes, highlighting what we're doing in our communities, in the way that our collaborations and our adherence to our values and how we're uplifting, how that is all uplifting our communities and ourselves for a bright future. At IAC, we've adopted this type of practice into our organizational structure. We have members, we provide technical assistance, free technical assistance to all tribes and all tribal producers across the nation, which is no small task, but we go where we're invited, right? So as producers reach out and request support, that is where we put our attention to, and we help to identify resources, to help overcome barriers, to provide specific specialized technical assistance on conservation planning or regenerative ag practices. We're working directly with the producers in the places that they need us, right? So there is a distinction, though. We do have membership tribes. We're serving all tribes and all producers, but there is also an opportunity to be a membership tribe with IAC, which helps to determine our priorities and our goals as an organization, the focus areas of the region. So each year at our annual conference, December 12th through the 14th in Las Vegas this year, please consider joining us if you're interested in learning more about this whole ecosystem of ag across the nation. But at our annual meeting, we also have our annual caucus meetings, where membership tribes have a chance to identify key issues that they want the focus area to be for the next year. And the membership tribes are then able to vote in, and we work on a consensus model. We are not picking up any issues that have some sort of conflict between tribal nations, where one might have a priority here and the other might have a conflicting priority on that same issue. That is not where we work. We're working to uplift and support the goals that align across the nation. So our caucus issue has opportunity for input and to vote. That's very important element of the work that we do. They become our marching orders, our guide, the way, the horizon that we're working towards to accomplish the goals that are identified in that meeting. Let's see. other key points. So communication, when working with tribal producers, think about when the stories come out, when connecting with your own family or with your grandmother, right? It's not tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. It's when you're doing the work, and so I really encourage that in-person engagement and the contribution, again bringing it back to what is the relationship of reciprocity, so what needs to be done in the community, around the house, on the farm, in production, right? And offer to lend a hand. Don't go into the engagement just expecting to be able to receive those gifts of story and information and photo. Again, think about how you can contribute. Are you helping to round up the cattle to help with the branding? Are you helping to do the harvest in the fall? Are you helping to sort the seeds from the chaff? Just thinking about the activities that need, and it is in those activities that the richest stories come forth, because you're building trust, you're showing your commitment to the community, to the individual, to the relationship, and in that you're building trust. And as the trust is established, then the stories are shared. So I can't emphasize it enough, when you're engaged in Indian country and you're looking to tell the story, do the work, be present, show up.
Thank you, Tikaan.
So we're going to talk to a journalist today from Indian country. So she is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Lenzy Krehbiel-Burton has been a full-time reporter at the Tulsa World since January of 2021. Prior to that, she covered Indigenous affairs on a freelance basis for a range of both mainstream and tribal outlets for more than a decade, including the late, great Big Heart Times, often called the only newspaper in the world that gives a diddly, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation's Tikaan, the now defunct Native American Times, Osage News, Reuters, and the Tulsa World. She's a past president of the Oklahoma Pro chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and she served 2 terms on the board of directors for the Indigenous Journalists Association, which used to be known as NAJA. She's a 3rd-generation Oklahoma State grad, just like myself. And she and her husband, Jacob, live on the far northern edge of the Muskogee Nation Reservation with their 2 children and their 2 cantankerous elderly cats. So welcome, Lenzy. Let's talk a little bit about sharing the Native perspective and how you do that as a journalist.
CO, and I'll apologize up front for my voice. My allergies have been in full throttle. So if I sound like Harvey Fierstein, please know it's not my choice. So as far, how do I go about sharing the Native perspective? As journalists, we have an obligation with our sourcing to be reflective of the communities that we're in. So when I'm writing for tribal outlets, it's, well, no, duh, you're going to include the Indigenous perspective. It's a given. When I'm writing for mainstream outlets, whether, either for my current employer or my previous employer, some of my previous freelance out clients, as some of the previous folks have said, Indian country is small. We all talk. So it's reaching out to those contacts, whether it's professional contacts, friends at NAJA, now known as IJA, I'm still getting used to the name change, or reaching out through other networks. As I mentioned in my bio, I'm an Oklahoma State graduate. They have an ag college. They also have a very active alumni association. It's reaching out through the, it's more than one story. I've reached out through the American Indian Alumni Society and saying, okay, I know y'all got, who knows somebody who can help me with X or Y or Z. It's making those connections. It's finding that person that can help make the introduction. And then from there, to piggyback a little bit off of what Tikaan said and what some other folks have said, it's continuing to show up. To put it very, very bluntly, you got to show up, shut up, and listen. It means checking if you have certain expectations coming in to talk with a source, whether it's an elder, somebody who's brand new to ranching, or the 4-H kid that just won a prize for their hog, just shut up and let them talk. I know that sounds very blunt, but it's their story. Put them at the center.
So when you've done these stories, what kind of responses have you gotten to those Native perspectives?
Well, and again, when writing, for tribal publications, it's, well, yeah, that's thank you for paying attention to the neighbor or so-and-so's kid, or thank you, it's expected because again, that's your community. For the mainstream outlets, it's the responses tend to be a little bit more, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, I didn't realize that. Because that's the other part. You have to know your audience. It may involve, yes, there's a lot of legwork to get the story, but when you're telling the story, you also have to explain it to make sure your audience understands. And if you don't understand when getting the story, your audience isn't either. Don't be afraid to ask, hey, can you spell it out like I'm 6? I get it, but the 6-year-old reading the paper won't.
Do you get a lot of audience engagement from those stories? Do you see that more than you might see in like one of your school board stories, or?
It varies very, very widely. Certain aspects of ag, yes, I do get a lot more feedback. For example, the stories I've done regarding school meals and food and nutrition programs through the USDA, I tend to get a lot more interaction and engagement with that versus a feature on FFA kits. It genuinely just depends on the topic at hand and also what's going on in the greater news cycle.
You had said earlier that you needed to do more than just show up once. What could that look like for somebody who's not part of a tribal nation?
Well, part of that depends on your community. I mean, are you in an urban setting or are you in a rural setting? I'm in an urban setting. I'm in Tulsa. So for me, that may mean showing up at an event, just showing up off the clock on your own time. I know gasp, time off is precious and it's a rarity, but showing up at events like the American, for example, Tulsa City County Library System has an American Indian Resource Center that has programming on a regular basis that's open to anybody. Just showing up to that. If you're in a community that is predominantly indigenous, that may mean being at, the high school softball games or the high school basketball games, just to be there as part of the community. If you're in a community where it's not quite as noticeable, Stillwater, I'm looking at you. It may mean, again, reaching out to the university or the other big game in town saying, okay, are there events going on that are open to the public where I can just be here and it not look like a creeper?
Do you see that kind of showing up paying dividends in like extra stories that maybe you weren't planning on? And how do you go about making sure that you are respectfully showing that culture, even since it wasn't something that you're planning on doing?
No, yes, it has on more than one occasion, where it's just, oh, hey, I know you. You're not going to portray us as you're going to be honest and shoot straight about what's going on. By the way, insert item here, insert story lead here. That does mean sometimes having to say, oh my gosh, thank you. Can I loop back with you? It goes back to being open and honest and transparent about, the timeline and the expectations and that sort of thing. But yes, being there has paid, just being there has paid dividends, continues to pay dividends. Heck, I was at Tulsa's Native American Day Parade on Monday, off the clock there as a parent, and got pulled aside and told about something that's brewing on my current beat because I just happened to be there on my, I recognize you. You need to know this.
That's awesome. So do you have any final tips for our audience today about sharing that Native perspective, and anything else that you want to share?
I just want to reiterate, our sources need to be reflective of our community as a whole. And if that means having to reach out and get out of your comfort zone a little bit, having to set, I know most folks don't have a Rolodex anymore, but setting aside the old school Rolodex or the contacts list in your cell phone and just asking around, hey, who do you know? Who's your people?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lenzy.
You are welcome.
Thank you so much, Lenzy. That was amazing. And what a good resource for us to have here today. So start writing about Native agriculture. The best way to start writing about Native agriculture is to just do it and to hop in and sink your teeth in it. And like Lenzy said, ask around, who do you know, who is well connected? And the next slide. So promoting and discussing Native agriculture is essential for preserving biodiversity and supporting sustainable food systems, which is why we're so excited that you all have joined us for this webinar series. And since Native American Heritage Month is around the corner, I put together a list of some ideas for article headlines for you to get started in the right area of Native agriculture. So the tile on the left is slightly more intended for those who perhaps have never written anything about Native agriculture and want to start with the basics. And then if you're looking to take a deeper dive into the world of Native agriculture, perhaps the tile on the right is more your speed. Either way, you can't go wrong. Remember to research beforehand, and like everyone has said before me, put Native American farmers, ranchers, and producers at the forefront of the conversation. They are the experts. Next slide. As Native Ag communicators, and for our organization specifically, we cover a lot. We cover many topics in multiple regions on a variety of platforms in all sorts of different ways. Our coverage is vast. If this slide is overwhelming, it's supposed to be, because we try to cater to all of our audiences. We stay busy thinking of the best way we can deliver this vital information. So this slide showcases some of the things we have created or published, including this webinar. And all of these things are essential to staying connected to our constituents in the Indian country food and agriculture industry. Though they may look different and have their own purpose, they all share the same goal, which is to advance agriculture in Indian country. Last March, the Native American Agriculture Fund held our inaugural broadcast for the State of Native Agriculture Address. The broadcast included several keynote speakers, few from the organizations here today, one being Secretary of Agriculture, where he specifically discussed priorities and objectives in Indian country ag that are being discussed on the Hill. So that was really important for us to have that representation there. And other speakers included members from Congress, local government, like I said, the fearless leaders of our own organizations. And we also featured some of the work being done by Indigenous peoples on the ground in Indian country. We're looking forward to hosting that event again in early 2024. So keep that on your radar for next year. So to wrap up my little section, we feel free to have a heyday on our websites, the Intertribal Ag Council, the Native American Agriculture Fund, the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. Go crazy. A lot of thoughtful work goes into each and every one of those publications and press releases that you see connected to our website. So if you have any questions or need any direction or assistance, we're always here and happy to help.
So besides all of our resources that are on our websites, IFAI has a press kit that has our logo on it. It has some bee footage and some general photos that you can use. IAC and NAF are putting together their own press kits that will be available after this webinar. There's some other additional resources. The nativegov.org has a style guide. The goal of that is really to show respect for Indigenous ways of being in the world. Native Americans are not a monolith. So making sure that you are tribe specific and that you're asking those tribal members, what do they want to be called? Do they want to be called Indigenous? Do they want to be called Native Americans? Do they want to be called Indian? Do they want to be called First Peoples? Those are all very important questions to be asking. So this style guide is a way for the world of publishing to be able to go and see what needs to be capitalized, what doesn't need to be capitalized. The National Congress of American Tribes has a Tribal Nations and the United States an introduction. It really gives you a fundamental understanding of the background and the guiding principles of tribal governance. And it gives a brief introduction into tribal governments, American Indians, Alaskan Natives. It gives you not only history, but also where we are today. Because as Mary Bell said, Native American people are still here and they're thriving.
And then finally, here are some resources and highlights that we would like for you all to check out after this webinar. We will also be sending out a follow-up email with hyperlinks to these materials and which will highlight more from this presentation. But to recap, we would like you all to frame the narrative not just as another story on disparities or barriers, but shift that narrative to cultivating success and prosperity and narrate how our producers are making that happen. And in that mindset, we ask that we focus on the vibrancy and diversity within Indian country. Now, if you need help getting started on changing that narrative, we also have some more resources here. We have Illuminative's presentation, Illuminative Narrative Change, and their resource guide, Change the Story, as well as reporting guides from the Native American Journalists Association. And last but not least, I want to stress that almost every article written has an impact on Indian country, and we ask that you include and consider Native voices in your written works. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Whitney.
Thanks, Gabby. And thank you all for your time in being here. We're going to move into questions and answers here just in a quick second. But I just wanted to say that the work begins with understanding. And that's why we are all here on this webinar. When producers are working day and night and tribes are engaging in conversation and education on their priorities, when different Native-led entities are collaborating with various stakeholders, it all starts with that understanding. And that's why it's vital to frame these media stories or the communication initiatives you're putting out through your organizations and focusing those around the strengths and highlighting the resilience and contributions that Native American producers have and their impact on the economy. Those positive narratives foster a more accurate understanding of Native American communities, and therefore the ability to frame and challenge different biases, encourage the full story of our communities. Native American agricultural producers have a deep connection with the land. They've been using sustainable farming practices that benefit not only their communities, but also the environments and the surrounding communities. They have profound knowledge of the biodiversity of land and that have been handed down through generations, allowing them to cultivate different crops in harmony with nature or different foodways. And those practices not only ensure food security, but also preserve the agricultural systems for generations. And Native agricultural producers, they generate revenue, they create jobs, they support local economies. And by focusing on their economic successes, we can find new ways to work collaboratively, expand and increase investments in resources that further enhance the economic power and growth in our rural communities. So thank you again for this opportunity. As Native Ag communicators and as media professionals, thank you for working with us to build trust with one another and to include Native perspectives in this vast space of agriculture. So we'll go ahead and move into questions and answers here. We've had some great ones come in already. I'll go ahead and start fielding a few of those, and feel free, any of the representatives from our organizations, if you'd like to jump in on these. But one question we had is, what kind of entities may be collecting more detailed data in Indian country that better honor or recognize tribal affiliations? And, just wondering how she can begin kind of finding that data and speak to those organizations. So Right off the bat, I would say encourage you to reach out to tribes. Because they are leading in their own food sovereignty assessments. They have data that are specific to their agriculture producers, their communities. But in addition, I do want to give a shout out to one of our grantees who's working to collect data and also analyze data that is specific to different tribal communities, and that's the Village Earth in their Native Information Land System database. It's a whole dashboard that gathers not only the ag census data, which has its limits and representation of accurately identifying how many agricultural producers are in Indian country, but they combine that with different data sets, and that's a valuable tool. So I'll share that in the chat here with everyone. But I also would shout out the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, and then IAC here as the umbrella for the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So if anybody else has anything else to add there, feel free to jump in.
Well, I know like whenever I was doing reporting and trying to find data, it was always an issue. And I mean, even in our role of researchers here at FAI, it's a constant issue that we're having to face. But there are all kinds of resources. I love some of the ones that Whitney mentioned. I'm a very visual person, and I can spend hours looking at the maps that Village Earth put together. We're really looking forward to the ag census data, and even just getting entities to think about how they're going about getting the different data sets and actually setting some aside for us to be able to participate. It even goes into, like nutrition guidelines, being able to pull data. Well, it doesn't exist. So it's really, really difficult to help like think about how are we going to make nutrition suggestions for a group of people whenever that data just doesn't exist. So unfortunately, that sometimes is the case, but there are a lot of really cool things. The government, I think, is even getting better. I can spend a lot of time in their food atlas maps as well. So if you want to go check out that, if you're visual like me, there are several great resources out there to help with that.
Another, sorry. Go ahead, Barbara.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to add that IC actually is working on a pretty large data project right now. I don't know if Tikaan wants to make mention of that or not, but because of the work that we do in the communities with tribal producers, we're actually tracking a lot of our own data, and we plan on sharing a lot of that at our annual conference event in December to kind of highlight the work that we're doing across the nation, which should be really exciting.
We also have the Emerson Hunger Fellows that we have two at our place, but they're all over the United States. And they are part of the Congressional Emerson Hunger Fellows, and they're each doing their own different research project. Ours happen to be doing urban Native American farming and how that is going. How to do that. But they all have their own unique projects.
Great. So a lot of different avenues to find and connect with those organizations that are collecting data, but again, also the tribes themselves is a great place to start. And we can be a good connector for you in that space if you'd like. So feel free to reach out to us. Another question here specifically, which of the organizations on this webinar would be best to help connect with farmers interviewing on a story regarding public health issues in agriculture? I would say that all of us, but I'll say specifically kind of break it down. So for example, from the Native American Agriculture Fund perspective, we can connect you with grantees that are, it depends on the region that you're looking at, or if you're looking more nationally, we have a network of more than 350 tribes, nonprofits, educational institutions, and CDFIs across the nation, where they are all working on projects to increase access to capital for producers. So they work with them directly. So that could be a good avenue, but also thinking from the data and research and policy space and lens, I would encourage you to reach out to the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. And our information is actually on the screen here, and this is the best way to reach us. But then also the Intertribal Agriculture Council with Tikaan, he talked about their technical assistance network and how they work directly with producers, but also as the umbrella for the Native Farm Bill Coalition, and understanding what those different tribal priorities are in this maybe space of public health issue and how it relates to agriculture. So there's a lot of different avenues depending on what you're looking for, but we can be good connectors for you. Are there any questions that have come through the chat? I might not be able to see those, but if you have any, feel free to submit them to the question and answer section here. But also reach out to us. This is the first step for us building that relationship, working together and collaboratively. So we're here to, it's not just the final opportunity to let us know if you have any questions. We're here to help. Yes, another opportunity, great suggestion here from Tikaan, is that the technical assistance network has their own specific regional technical assistance specialist. So if Tikaan, do you want to speak to that just a little bit more?
Yep. Yeah, I was speaking to the caucus issues earlier, but didn't fully highlight the TA network. And so we have technical assistance specialists in regions across the state or across the nation, and they are working directly with the tribes and the tribal producers, so they can be a strong point of contact for engaging with the producers in your region. And just follow that link that was just shared in the chat to see the contact information for the technical assistance specialist in your region.
Great. So another question we had come in was about is if there's a place where there host like research-based articles regarding Indigenous farming and where those are being maintained. Maribel, do you have insight on that?
You know, whenever I've always done research in the past for anything, I've used local libraries. I've used different database systems that way. I've looked up different tribal newspapers, knowing, okay, hey, they have this program here. I'm wanting to maybe talk about it over here. So that's the best way that I've done it. Like, there's not necessarily a central place on our website or a central place anywhere where we're including a ton of articles, but we do have our policy brief weekly where we put at the bottom just a few news articles related back to Indian country food and ag. So those could be a weekly resource where you can kind of see what other folks are doing when they're trying to cover stories on Indian country food and ag. But for me personally, when I was a reporter, I used my library all the time. I had digital subscriptions too, which hopefully you guys are already using some of those databases as well to be able to find the different articles that are coming up that way. But that would be my suggestion.
Oh, go ahead, Tish.
The other thing is when we do a policy analysis, they are research based. And so we put all of our different where we get that information from. So our sources at the very bottom so that anyone can look them up and you can go and find those resources as well.
Great. And then another shout out for that Native Information Land System platform is that they have interactive story maps. So those help really kind of provide that digital storytelling tools that put that data into context. So that might be a good place to start as well. All right. Have any more final questions that come through? And then I think we have one more suggestion for that last question. Tikaan, if you want to provide that example there that you were able to submit there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about an opportunity here based on that question. You know, we have different associations like the National Communications Association or the Public Relations Society of America, you know, and, you know, the need for a centralized place to draw from research and previous articles and have an organization to house that type of data and make it available to communication professionals such as all of y'all, you know, would be super beneficial, right? So I think there's an opportunity here to either create a chapter specific to American Indian Alaska Native people and the public relations and communications that are going out related to us, or, you know, create an entirely new organization to support that nationwide. Just a thought.
Awesome, thank you for that.
I was going to ask Lenzy if IJA does anything like that.
As far as a local level affinity groups, or we do not have local chapters at this time. However, the resources that we do have, like for example, I think the bingo card was mentioned at one point, and some of our other resources we do keep on NAJA's website. And I will put that link if you're playing the home game. Although yes, they're in the process. NAJA's in the process of going through a name change. For now, at least, the website is najanewsroom.com. There is a tab with resources, including reporting guides, a style insert, and the bingo card, which basically, to encourage you to avoid hitting on the stereotypes. If you get more than one square on that bingo card, get help. Just get help.
Great. And I think that's a very good reminder to end on for today. I know we're getting up the top of the hour. So thank you all again to our speakers and for your attendance and also their organizations on this. We appreciate your time and look forward to working together moving forward. Thank you.
We have one last comment here. Haiti Raider, she was saying that she's wrapping up a math project that involves a report on Alaska Native food and agriculture. So she has her email address that if you are interested in Alaska Native food and ag, you can reach out to her for that report. I'll put that in the group chat soon.
Yeah. And we can also be a connector for you with that as well. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you all.
All right, seeing nothing else, I'll go ahead and close out this webinar. Thank you all very much.